Welcome back to the Screen Crush Break Room. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in Venom, Let There Be Carnage. So right at the top, I want to mention that this movie seemed like a strange homage to Spider-Man 2, the Sam Raimi one. These two movies are beat for beat alike. In that movie, Peter is in conflict with his other self, Spider-Man, just like Eddie and Venom are conflicted. The hero has a personal connection with the villain, who is also in love. After a conversation with the villain, the hero makes an improvement in their civilian career. Then the villain is transformed into a monster in a way that connects to the hero. Peter warned Otto about the fusion reaction, and Venom spawned Carnage. After the transformation, the hero teams up with the even more evil personality that gives them powers, and he is motivated by his lost love. Around this time, the hero's love interest has left him for someone else. Because he hates being a hero, he leaves his alter ego behind and temporarily loses his powers. The hero regains his power when the villain goes on a rampage and threatens the woman he loves. At the end, the villain kidnaps the hero's love interest, and after a fight inside a large structure, the villain dies. But a new villain is teased at the end of the film, and the hero is finally okay with having a double life. Now, do you think this is from the Sony sequel playbook? Is it a coincidence? Let me know in the comments, and let's get back to the Easter eggs. We open at St. Este's orphanage, where Cletus Cassidy was raised in the comics. We meet Shriek and young Cletus, who does not look at all like Woody Harrelson, but sounds exactly like him. They communicate with a piece of string through their wall, and a nice attention to detail, Shriek holds onto that string throughout her imprisonment at Ravencroft. Now, the movie says that she has a mutation, which is interesting. For one, when Fox had the rights to make X-Men movies, no other superhero movie could even come near the word mutant or mutation.
This is the age of miracles, Doctor.
But now that Disney owns the X-Men, and Disney is somewhat aligned with Sony, maybe they gave them the okay for Shriek to maybe be a mutant. Now, this doesn't mean that you're going to see Wolverine appearing in Morbius or anything like that, but it could mean that Spider-Man villains like Vermin or Carrion could end up being mutations like her. So a guard shoots out her eye, giving her a scar like the one she has in the comics. Now, the cop that shot her is later played by the great Stephen Graham, Al Capone on Boardwalk Empire. His character, Mulligan, is from the comics. He's a beat cop who eventually bonds with the spawn of Carnage, so he's Venom's grandson, and he becomes the villain Toxin. So that's probably a sequel tease for him at the end of the movie. Venom will face a symbiote who hates other symbiotes. Now, I really did like the backstory of Cletus and Francis. It makes way more sense than how they met in the comic event Maximum Carnage. Basically, Carnage is breaking out of Ravencroft, he meets Shriek, and they're like, hey, you want to mess up stuff and form a warped family with supervillains because there's a video game tie into this story and a lot of money at stake, so we need to introduce other characters? And she's like, sure. In this movie, they have a real bond that was forged through trauma. Francis gets taken to Ravencroft, which in the comics is a very nice care facility run by a kind doctor named Kafka. But in the movies, Ravencroft is always a torture chamber and Kafka is a sadist.
And I will get results. I always do.
So then we check in on Eddie, who has been writing pieces on Cletus Cassidy for the Daily Bugle. And notice the masthead is the same as the one that we saw in the Sam Raimi movies. Almost like saying that if all these movies are different multiverses, then this one is a bridge between the Raimi movies and the MCU. I really like the ongoing conflict between Eddie and Venom in the film. How Venom is always up for a good time, and Eddie is saddled with this toddler from space.
It's like living with an oversized toddler.
It even plays into what Tom Hardy said, that this is essentially like the Odd Couple. Venom is Oscar, and Eddie is Felix. It's pretty great. Their dynamic plays like Eddie Valiant and a super violent Roger Rabbit. Venom says he wants to be free, to feel the sand in his toes and the wind in his hair, which of course is how the movie ends. He also says,
responsibility is for the mediocre.
Which seems like a jab at Spider-Man's power and responsibility line. You know, Carnage's trail of destruction was fun to watch, but it also got me thinking. I could go at any time. It may not be an alien life form in a symbiotic state with a serial killer that does me in, but tomorrow is not a promise. It really makes me think about what I would leave behind for the people I love. And really, so should you. If you have a family that relies on your income, then you need life insurance. Now look, I know choosing insurance policy seems weird and complicated, but that's why I recommend Policy Genius, the sponsor of this video. It's very easy to use. Head over to policygenius.com/screencrush to get started. In just a few minutes, you can work out how much coverage you need and compare personalized quotes to get your best price. Policy Genius is not an insurance company. They help you to compare quotes from more than a dozen of the top insurers all in one place. It's their job to work with different insurance companies to find the best rates for you. And they handle all of the paperwork and applications for free. You could save 50% or more on life insurance by comparing quotes with Policy Genius. And you can save $1,300 or more per year by using Policy Genius to compare your life insurance policies. Eligible applicants can get covered in as little as a week. Remember what Jack Napier said.
Think about the future.
And don't put this off off till you're older because life insurance is way cheaper when you're still young. Get a good rate now and lock it in for decades. So head over to policygenius.com/screencrush to get started right now. Now, I thought the scenes of Tom Hardy talking to himself were even better in this movie, and that may be thanks to director Andy Serkis. After all, who knows better how to talk to their CGI doppelganger?
Leave now and never come back.
So Eddie's bike helmet is also covered in peace symbols. I think this is to symbolize that he is a more passive person, trying to prevent Venom from eating people. By the end of the movie, he has to overcome this passive nature and embrace the violence of Venom. Eddie and Venom keep chickens named Sonny and Cher, a nod to the 70s variety show hosts who, like Venom and Eddie, had a tumultuous relationship. Now, the tire for him to take out his aggression on is called Snooki, named after the acclaimed author of A Sure Thing, Snooki. So the movie says that Venom needs a chemical called phenylethamine to survive, and it's only in chocolate and brains. This is not true. The chemical is in chocolate, and it's believed to release endorphins in the brain that simulate the feeling of love. So this movie about a space alien going on a murder spree sucks at science. When Mrs. Chen says she's 39, Venom says, "Yeah, and I'm Barry Manilow." This is a neat way to foreshadow that he will end up on stage and that he loves to sing. So in the stands, we see a comic book magazine with Stan Lee on the cover as Stan Lee, meaning that Stan Lee exists as a comic book creator in this universe, and that this guy from the last movie was Stan Lee. But there are no cameos for David Michelinie or Todd McFarlane, the guys who actually created Venom. Eddie and Ann have a cat named Mr. Belvedere, named after the sitcom Nanny.
I just might live the good life yet.
And man, the best stuff in this movie is when Venom gets involved in Eddie's personal life, like when he forces him to cry or tells him,
I cannot mend a broken heart.
The next day, he tries to cheer Eddie up by making him breakfast, and he sings,
Let's call the whole thing off!
And this is a famous duet about two people who are together but can't agree on anything, just like Eddie and Venom. And then Cletus sends him a postcard with his signature red ink, here retelling his origin story. Just like in the comics, Cletus is probably an unreliable narrator. His origin is tweaked slightly from the comics, where his mother was an inmate at Ravencroft and gave birth to Cletus while she was locked up. But in the comics and the movie, he briefly died at childbirth before being revived, and he had an abusive father. Now, while writing the letter, Cletus smashes a spider and eats it, right when he says, everyone has an origin story. This is a nod to Spider-Man's origin story, being bitten by a radioactive spider. But because Carnage is so mean and nasty, he's the one who eats the spider instead of Spider eating you. After reading the postcard, Venom bursts ketchup on Eddie's shirt, signaling the bloody carnage that's about to come. Venom refers to himself as a lion, and Eddie wears a Detroit Lions jacket. It's great, isn't it? It's a really good Easter egg. When they arrive at the prison, Venom wants to eat a prisoner, but Eddie reminds him of making a murderer, the Netflix documentary that seemed to prove that Steve Avery was innocent of murdering a young woman. And then later, Cletus says that Eddie is on a magical misery tour, a play on the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour. Now, I did think it was interesting that Cletus sees Eddie as a kindred spirit. They both feel responsible for their mother's deaths, had abusive fathers, and have lost the women they love. Then he bites Eddie, and Carnage is born.
I have tasted blood before, and that is not it.
Now, in the comics, Brock and Cassidy were cellmates. When the symbiote breaks Eddie out of jail, it reproduced. So, both instances happen in prison, but here it's not immediately clear that Venom spawned. It's more like Cletus ripped off a piece of him. Then Eddie and Venom have their domestic dispute, where Eddie mentions that he once had a successful TV show, which we saw a glimpse of in Venom 1.
Eddie Bart with boots on the ground today in the Mission District.
Eddie also says that Venom's planet is called Minmar, but in the comics it's called Clintar, which in the symbiote language means cage. Then they have their falling out, so we can repeat the superhero trope of the hero losing their powers in the sequel. So then Cletus is rushed sentenced to death by lethal injection, but this actually activates the symbiote inside him. In the comics, Cletus' symbiote actually merged with his blood, so they became one single entity. I thought they were going to do something similar here because we see Cletus' body transform into Carnage, but at the end of the movie they are separate entities. So let me offer an explanation. The Carnage symbiote does bond with Cletus' body on a molecular level. It is not something that he wears, but being attached to a human makes it even more sensitive to fire and sound. So, as a defensive measure, the symbiote is able to shed the human DNA that it has in itself and essentially recreate the body and mind of Cletus Cassidy. As he transforms, Cletus says, "Something wicked this way comes," and this quote is originally from the witches in Macbeth, warning Macbeth that he has become a power-hungry monster. But the phrase was also used by Ray Bradbury for his novel of the same name. The novel is about an evil being who seems to grant people's fondest desires while secretly enslaving them.
We are the hungry ones.
Your torments call us like dogs in the night.
Basically describing the relationship of Carnage and Cletus, where the symbiote is using Cletus for his own ends. So then Cletus goes on a rampage, freeing inmates just like in the comic Maximum Carnage. Carnage is one of the most striking and bold-looking Spider-Man villains, but in the movie, I thought he looked like ass. Very muted, blurry, you can barely even tell that he's red. But I guess that just makes the CGI cheaper. But his scream was awesome. So when Cletus leaves San Quentin, he appropriates a Johnny Cash line from the song San Quentin. He sings, "I'll walk out a stronger and wiser man," but the actual lyric is, "a wiser, weaker man." Either way, his tag is great. And that warden tasted just like ham. So then Venom goes on his walkabout, partying and using people up. You'll remember from the first movie that Eddie was the only match for the Venom symbiote, which is why everyone else can only hold on to him for so long. As he leaves the body, he says another one bites the dust, again showing an affinity for music. I wouldn't have been mad actually if this entire movie had been wall-to-wall Queen songs. Then he shows up at a festival featuring the rapper Little Simz, who's probably in the movie because she had a song called Venom go viral on TikTok earlier this year. At the masquerade, we spotted Babadook among the partiers, and Venom is a huge hit, finally finding acceptance.
Oh yeah!
He takes the mic from Little Simz, again showing his love of the spotlight. And I half expected him to break out into song like he does in this great panel from Amazing Spider-Man 363. This is the first of many times he calls himself Lethal Protector, the name of his first limited series in the comics. It's not very good. So Cletus helps Shriek escape Ravencroft just like in the comics, and we established that Shriek's powers hurt Carnage and he doesn't like her. I thought this was a wasted opportunity, a love triangle with Cletus in the middle. At the end of the movie, Shriek's sonic powers don't have any effect on the story except to topple the bell tower. Mrs. Chen nurses Venom back to health in what I'm going to say is the weirdest, funniest, best scene in the movie. So Mulligan brings in Eddie, recounting the events of Venom 1, the body count, the shuttle launch of the Life Foundation, etc. This is laying the groundwork for Mulligan to hate monsters and symbiotes so he can become another evil symbiote in the next movie. So Anne once again becomes She-Venom just like she does in the comics. Then we have this weird scene where Eddie has to apologize to Venom through her, and he's saying things that he should have said to Anne, and now he's kind of saying them to her, and the movie doesn't really address this or play it up in any way, but I still enjoyed it.
Don't give up on her. Either of you.
So Carnage says it's going to be a red wedding, maybe a nod to this.
The Lannisters send their regards.
At the cathedral, Mozart's Requiem is playing, the piece that he was unable to complete before he died. The lyrics talk about rising from the ashes to be judged, just like Carnage and Shriek are rising from captivity to judge their persecutors. During the battle, Venom is freaked out by Carnage.
That is a red one!
And Carnage does call him father, confirming that, yeah, he is a spawn of Venom in the movie. But when Anne is falling, we actually see her reflection in Venom's eyes. This seemed to deliberately mirror the death of Gwen Stacy in Amazing Spider-Man 2. During the fight, Carnage poses like Da Vinci's drawing of man in front of a stained glass window. Now, in the first movie, Carlton Drake talks about how symbionts are mankind's key to becoming higher life forms. And we see that symbolized here. When a symbiote combines with a human, they become godlike. This window scene also seems taken from the Maximum Carnage comics, or more specifically, this fight from the video game. So what ends up defeating Carnage is that Cletus and the symbiont are not actually a good match, which was alluded to in the great Warren Ellis comic, Carnage Mind Bomb. And at the very end, Venom eats Carnage just like he does here in Spider-Man number 10. Then Venom and Eddie and Sonny and Cher visit the statue of Miguel Cervantes, author of Don Quixote. Now, it's hard to sum up Don Quixote for an Easter egg video, but basically, it's about a guy who decides that the real world is just too awful, so he decides to pretend that he is a great knight out of a storybook, aided by his squire Sancho. The novel is about embracing the imagination to see the good in the world. Instead of seeing the world as it is, see it as it should be. Or, as Eddie quotes it, facts are the enemy of truth. In this scenario, Eddie has decided to embrace the role of Don Quixote. Rather than attempt to live within the normal world, he's going to embrace Venom, his Sancho, and lead the life of a hero, the Lethal Protector. At the end, they retreat to a beach, just like in the comics, when Peter fooled the symbiote into thinking he'd been killed. The credits are made to look like Rorschach inkblot tests, which look like the symbiotes and are a nod to Cletus' time in psychiatric hospitals. And then we have that awesome post-credit scene, which we fully broke down in this video, so make sure you check that one out. Well, that's all the Venom Easter eggs that we found, but if you found any, let me know in those comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.